Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we're interviewing Dan. Dan is an international entrepreneur based in Southeast Asia. Today he gives us his view on business and economic trends as the curve flattens and we emerge into post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ.tax. And we're live. Dan, good to see you. How are you today?
Not too bad. Just here in KL, basically struggling through the lockdown. Got another month or so, allegedly. See how long that lasts. But.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess the whole world joins in solidarity. I mean, many of us, we have no choice, but for some, I guess, it's a bit easier than others in terms of the strictness of the lockdown. Dan, could you introduce yourself, tell people a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Dan Murphy. I'm 27 years old. I grew up in the United States in Maine in the Northeast. Been an entrepreneur since I was 22. Initially, right out of college, I went and worked in Belgium for an international media company. They sent me to the Philippines for a project. Shortly thereafter, I quit that because I hated it. So I was basically stuck, 22 years old in Southeast Asia, with basically no money, not really any job prospects. And I met a friend of mine who's from the UK, and we decided to start a media agency together with the limited amount of money that we had. And quickly we grew that to a multinational company with dozens of employees, some very big multinational clients in Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, US, Middle East. And I recently sold that about 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. So now I'm in the process of transitioning to becoming an e-commerce entrepreneur. That was put on hold by the coronavirus pandemic, seeing as you can't really ship anything overseas unless you want to pay super expensive couriers. But yeah, so now I'm transitioning to creating digital online content with a business partner of mine here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So things like consulting entrepreneurs and startups, helping companies transition to digital-based businesses. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. So I think you're like the right person to speak to. So essentially, there's a lot of discussion and speculation as to what the post-pandemic world will look like. So maybe you can give us some of your perspective. What do you think awaits us at the end of this tunnel?
Well, I guess it depends on how long you think the tunnel is. For me, I think it's personally, I think it's going to be a lot longer than maybe some people anticipate. I think once the initial lockdowns are let up, like you're starting to see in Europe right now, and probably in Southeast Asia and the US in the next month or so. I mean, I think if history dictates anything, like you saw with the Spanish flu pandemic in the early 20th century, that you'll have a first wave, which we just had right now, and then there's going to be kind of a lull, and then I think it'll kick back up in a few months, just, by the fact that people are going to be going out, mingling. I mean, all it takes is one person, how a pandemic starts, so it's going to kick back up again. The question will be is what level of infection rate do governments and businesses deem acceptable, and whether or not there'll be a second wave of lockdowns, or whether there'll be sort of limited kind of rollout where people are still working from home, bars and restaurants are still closed. I mean, that's a per country, per government basis. But I don't see there being light at the end of the tunnel really until 2021. It really has to come down to if there's a vaccine. But when we do get out of that, I think there's going to be a pretty major transformation. I think companies that can adapt aren't going to survive, unless they're massive and gigantic. And some people might not like to hear it, but I think a lot of businesses will get leaner and stronger by the fact that they had to eliminate some of their less essential employees. I mean, that's not something I would want to hear if I was one of those non-essential employees, but the fact of the matter is I think people are going to have to adapt their skill sets. Companies are going to have to evolve to a place where they can basically operate remotely, or at least semi-remotely. I think you see a major overhaul to companies' logistics and supply chains. because as we saw, I mean, like I said, my own personal business was derailed because of supply chain and logistics problems. But if you're a major international company that has the ability and the cash to invest and to adapt to those supply chain and logistics problems, then I think in the long run, that's for the better. But yeah, I mean, the impact on small businesses is really bad. Just from my own perspective, from most of my friends work for small businesses or entrepreneurs themselves, and a lot of people are being taken off payroll, indefinite unpaid leave. But I think it also presents an opportunity for people to, basically develop new skill sets, do a lot of things that, they may have never thought to do, like myself, for example. I never would have thought of creating online content and kind of mentoring people, so to speak. That's not something I was really remotely interested in, but just the circumstances have made it my only option, really. So I think there's going to be a lot of people like me basically put in a position where their back's against the wall and they're going to have to develop new skills and new avenues I never would have thought to explore. And I think that will have a long-term positive impact. I mean, if you look at the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of young, new, innovative companies that came out of it. And I think this is a lot more serious than 2008 financial crisis. So I think you'll see a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands and a lot of boredom, and maybe that's going to spark creativity and new ideas. So I think it'll be exciting to see what potentially could come out of it. Right now, we're still not quite far along enough to really see what that will be like, but hopefully, me being the optimist side of me is saying hopefully things will be a lot better in terms of creativity. Maybe it'll accelerate, technological innovation. It'll definitely accelerate the digital adoption from, say, a lot of big companies that were initially resistant to it. I think you're going to see them adopt, whether it's making products available online, working remotely. They're going to have to digitize their businesses, or else they're going to fall behind. They're going to die.
So in that sense, like I know it's a really perhaps crude comparison, but like with the disease, people who have pre-existing conditions are perhaps more vulnerable than others. And I guess it may be the same with companies that were previously weak. They may not survive what was coming. And I wondered to what extent that may lead to at least in the short term, consolidation, in that the big companies, perhaps not always, but they often have an advantage in that they have access to credit. They may be sitting on a pile of cash because they've been in business longer, whereas small startups who don't have access to credit, that are not sitting on a pile of cash, they may not be able to ride this, right through this downtime. But so I'm asking whether you see that consolidation. So either small businesses need to come together, or big businesses will gobble the small guys up. But I do take your point that further out, so I guess in the medium term, innovation and creativity wins the day. And we can't underestimate human ingenuity. So we will come out on the right side. But in the short term, do you see consolidation?
Well, going back to your comparison, I actually thought of that myself as well. Okay. So you're not you're not crazy for thinking that. I don't think it's inappropriate to kind of make that comparison. It's kind of like a culling of kind of the businesses that were bound to fail, I guess. Yeah. It's just accelerating that process, and there's obviously horrible consequences to that. Go back to your question. I think definitely there would be some. I think you're right to think that say big businesses might gobble up smaller ones, or they might incorporate or acquire certain startups. I was thinking more just from a personal standpoint that a lot of people that are cash rich, whether that's investors or angel investors, I think they'll look at this as a opportunity to say, okay, let's say they have the money in the stock market, although the stock market's doing all right now, but it obviously crashed earlier. They might say, all right, I can make the best out of this opportunity, because typically angel investors, those type of people are kind of opportunists. They'll see the best out of this, and from a lot of them that I've talked to, because I was in the process of getting funding for my own company, that basically all of them see this as an opportunity, maybe not to invest in the types of businesses they had been, but into new innovative ones. And I think there's something to be said that there's so many people, especially entrepreneurs or people that are on unpaid leave, for example, that just have a lot of time on their hands, and this is a perfect opportunity to develop new, fresh ideas, and maybe ones that were a little bit out there. But yeah, I think definitely from a entrepreneurship and individual or investment fund kind of aspect, that they'll see this as a major opportunity. Speaking to the corporations, I mean, it really depends on a case-by-case basis. I know a lot of these big companies they're just slashing everything. I mean, like Disney laid off or put on furlough 100,000 employees last week. I don't know how many of them are necessarily going to be investing in startups. It might be internally developing their own kind of contingency plans. I think it would be smart for them to either invest or acquire startups that are struggling right now. I think you'll definitely see that happen to a degree. I can't speak to the level or scope of what that'll be. But yeah, I think there's definitely there's a silver lining to all this. There's definitely opportunities for not only entrepreneurs, but investors and large companies.
And let's stay with that for a while, startups, entrepreneurs, VCs. Do you see that previous to this pandemic, there was a sort of like a bubble brewing in that there was a lot of cash chasing ideas that weren't particularly profitable or had the potential to be profitable? It was a game of, let's just scale up and exit. And this cash they were chasing negative margin businesses on businesses that didn't necessarily have the potential to be cash flow positive, to be profitable. And so what happens to that whole ecosystem now? Would we still be in a place where a young guy with a great idea would get $1 million thrown behind him, particularly, or would you see a more like conservative ecosystem evolving out of this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. It was something that I noticed, maybe 6 months ago, especially in Southeast Asia and East Asia, like what happened with SoftBank, with their investments in companies like Grab, for example, although Grab is pretty profitable, but like say with WeWork, where I think the general sentiment was that they were trying to kind of move away from unprofitable businesses and move towards kind of your typical, investing. All right, here's our profit margin. Here's how we scale, become more profitable. I guess that was about like a 10, 12 year period from the last Great Recession, 2008, until basically this year, where you're seeing companies that just have these massive valuations that are just speculative. They're just made up. I think investors were starting to come around to the fact that that wasn't a tenable strategy, because it's all just based on speculation. None of it's real. How's a company losing $100 million or $200 million a quarter worth $50 billion or however much it's valued at? So yeah, I think this probably expedited the demise of those types of companies. I think they'll always be there, because those unprofitable companies, at least when they start, they're unprofitable. They typically have the most out there ideas, and they require super long-term kind of foresight. But yeah, I think the trend was already there, and this has probably accelerated the mindset of, okay, we need something because cash is king right now, right? You need something that's bringing in profits, is liquid, as opposed to just had billions of dollars sunk into it and hope one day you hope it makes money, or you hope you exit and somebody else buys you out. But I don't know how many people will be buying you out now if you're a massively unprofitable company, unless it's somebody like Facebook or Amazon or Google or something, where they see value in whatever service you have and they'll just incorporate it into their own platform. But those are a dime a dozen. So
okay, and let's kind of like take a step back and look at things from an almost a macroeconomic perspective, because I want to take advantage of the fact that you've been based and you've been doing business in Southeast Asia for a while, so you have that insider perspective on emerging markets. So where you have a big a fairly large labor force in an underdeveloped infrastructure like the Philippines or Indonesia.
Yeah.
How do you see them coming out of this, given that they don't necessarily have the budgets for a big bailout like the Western or more advanced economies?
Yeah.
What is your insight? What do you see?
Well, I've always been disappointed with the lack of loyalty and support that companies in Southeast Asia have for their employees. For the most part, a lot of them are grossly underpaid. They're worked inhumane hours in a lot of cases, even your typical office workers. 12-hour days, or in say like a country like the Philippines or Indonesia, there's a 2-hour commute to work 10 hours, 2-hour commute home, something like that. And I think just from people that I know in personal experience, there's a lot of people being laid off. There's a lot of people that are asked to continue working but not be paid. And it's not that these companies don't have the money to support their employees. They just have never done so, and they're not going to choose to do so now when things are even more dire. So I don't necessarily see companies coming out of this becoming more liberal or becoming more courteous or more supportive of their employees. If anything, it might be even worse, honestly. Just so I know, a lot of Western companies, although a lot of them are still quite ruthless and they're uncompassionate towards their employees and lay them off or cut their benefits, at least some of them are making efforts to keep their employees, their head above water. Right now, I don't see that happening in Southeast Asia. Down the road, potentially. I mean, ever since I've lived here, we're kind of saying to ourselves, like, it's on the, it's 10, 20 years away from becoming progressive. I still haven't seen that really happen. I mean, it's getting a little bit better. But I don't see this being beneficial to workers' rights necessarily in Southeast Asia, other than the fact that maybe employers will be more flexible in terms of people working from home, from people who are at risk in terms of if they have medical problems, that sort of thing. But I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but I don't really see a major change in how companies operate here just because they've never been really that flexible to start with. And they've taken some fairly harsh measures here. But certain countries, like Malaysia, for example, that have many government-connected companies or government-linked companies, they at least have the government backing and all the money, bailout money coming in where they can basically keep on all their employees. And I know the companies in Southeast Asia that actually are the most progressive and treat their employees best tend to be startups and small businesses. But if they can't survive this, then who knows? But I don't see from like your typical corporate level company here, it's in Southeast Asia in general, really making any massive, beneficial changes for their employees necessarily. But maybe that's me being a pessimist, but that's just speaking from personal experience and from what I see happening right now. But.
So in that context, do you see any implications in terms of social stability? Because if you have a whole bunch of people in a huge metropolitan area like downtown Manila or Jakarta, and suddenly these guys that live day to day, and you take that away from them, that may have some implications. What do you think?
We saw that happen in the Philippines, where the Philippine government, maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where the Philippine government was supposed to be providing rice and water and basic medical care to these, massive slum communities that they have in Metro Manila. And they weren't doing it. So they came out and protested, and then Duterte threatened to shoot them all and told the police to shoot them if they tried it again. So there was a big backlash against that. And you actually, for the first time, I think, in Duterte's presidency in the Philippines, for people that don't know who that is, you started to see actually a majority of people kind of speaking out against him. Whereas he was a populist candidate, so the people that were loudest were typically his supporters, but all of a sudden you saw that switch because, it turns out the government wasn't sticking out for them. But I think in general in Southeast Asia, because it's a lot different than Western culture, where most families have a support system, whether it's children supporting the parents or the grandparents or vice versa. at least, and that's only for a certain segment of the population, but it's quite large. So at least in these cases, a lot of people can kind of at least have some degree of a safety net within their family, but let's go live from home, and the only living expenses is like a bag of rice or something, if times really are tough. But there's another segment of the population that's desperately in need of daily paychecks or government support. And if they can't deliver that, then I think there will be some degree of social upheaval. Just on a grander point, I think there's going to be some severe political implications. I mean, if you asked me 6 months ago, I said I would have thought Donald Trump would get reelected just because the U.S. was doing so great. And whatever your opinion is on who's, what the reason for that was, but now I think just not only just in the U.S., but the way that a lot of governments have bungled the lockdown, that weren't proactive at first, and I think what will happen, I think once these countries start to let their lockdowns let people out, and then if there's a big uptick again and they have to lock down again, I think people will say, hindsight's 2020, but they'll say, what the hell were you doing? And I think there's going to be some, not just social implications, but political implications for that. But yeah, in Southeast Asia, the thing is, the majority of the population is always kind of overlooked. It's kind of, governments here typically to serve people within the government, the people in the upper social stratosphere. And I don't know if that's really going to change that much. I mean, maybe there's the kind of, the vast majority of people will have a bigger voice, or at least they'll be heard by people. But what changes will be made unless things get really, really bad? I'm not sure there'll be a huge kind of change to things, but maybe it'll be an opportunity for those people to actually be heard and to have the governments actually stick up for them for once. But yeah, I think broad ranging, at least for countries that are going to have changes of government or elections upcoming, I think this will have a major impact on that.
I see. And in terms of your outlook right now, obviously this is an event that we could not really anticipate. Does this have any implications? Because you're globally mobile, you can be anywhere with your skills or whatever. Are you still bullish on Southeast Asia? Are you kind of rethinking that and wondering whether you should look at other regions, a more advanced economy? What is your outlook?
I was actually happy to be in Southeast Asia because it's probably the safest place to be in the world right now. Like I don't want to go back to the U.S. Don't want to go to Western Europe. Actually, I mean, the Southeast Asian governments did a really good job of containing this. I was critical at first because it was going to mess up my life, and I thought it was all overblown. And it was media hype, which, in hindsight, that was completely wrong. But they actually were, because I think they have more authoritarian governments here, and societies are more kind of, subservient, you might say, to their governments. That they were able to act quickly and efficiently and just contain it. No, I don't. I think this kind of reinforces my belief in Southeast Asia and why I want to be here. Just because I think, because the governments here are resilient. They are, a lot of times they're linked to businesses, which in a lot of cases is not a good thing, but in a crisis like this, I think it actually is. And I think you will start to see, and I actually have been seeing, a lot more digital adoption in these Southeast Asian countries, which have been really resistant to it. I mean, I used to run a digital marketing agency, and a lot of these big companies were just, the things that worked so well for them, let's say through traditional retail or through, their traditional ways of doing business and selling, and now they have to adapt. And for somebody like me, that's great because that's, not only do I think that's the way forward, and I think that's best for consumers and for businesses, it's also good for my own business. So I think, actually, I think it's kind of reinforced my my desire to stay here, honestly. I just see what happened in a lot of Western countries, and just like talking to my parents, relatives, and friends in the U.S. about how politically divisive coronavirus became, when it should be a time when people kind of unify and come together because it's a threat to everybody. And that didn't happen in the U.S. or in other Western countries. And I think that's where the real social change and the real distrust of government will start to kick in, and ultimately instability potentially. Whereas here in Southeast Asia, everybody's kind of in it together, you know?
Mhm.
So I think it's reinforced my belief, actually, in this part of the world. So
Okay, wow. So optimistic outlook, and Southeast Asia is a place to be. Dan, thank you for your time. I appreciate you sharing your insights and your perspectives. Thank you
thanks for
very
thinking of
much.
me.
Okay,
Yeah, any other time you wanna do this, let me know.
I will. Thank you.